Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of Artist Stories of Middle Georgia. I'm your host, Victor Rigoli, back in the studio, and I've got a great guest with me today, Charles Ward, Professor Charles Ward. And I'm excited that you're able to join me today. You and I met 2, 3 weeks ago, I think it was. I'm taking some art lessons from Beth Smith and down in her studio in the Perry location, which is not too far from my home. And she went out of the country for almost 2 weeks, and you filled in for her. And that's how we got to know each other. And we found out what a small world it is, and how your path crossed with my brother at Middle Georgia State University. And then your wife is the twin sister of a former co-worker of mine there at Geico. And so that was just really neat. It's just a small world. And I said, I've got to have you on my podcast because we talked about a lot of different things. And I appreciate you sending me your bio. And I tell you, that is a very extensive, detailed bio. And we could spend probably 10 minutes reading through and discussing some of that. But I want you to kind of hit some of the highlights of your background and just where does your artist story begin? So take it away, Charles.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm originally from Macon, Georgia, and which is where I am now. I have a BA in art with a concentration in drawing from Piedmont College in Demorest, Georgia. A Master of Arts in Teaching with a concentration in art from George Carlson State University, and a Master of Fine Art in Fine Art with a concentration in two-dimensional design from Western Carolina University in Colway, North Carolina. And I I was an assistant professor of art at originally Macon State, and then during the transition into Middle Georgia State, I also taught at most of the schools, most of the colleges in the area, with the exception of Fort Valley and Gordon. And I've written a lot of uh, lesson plans, accreditation rubrics, things like that that are still used by a number of the schools today. I've also taught high school. I taught at Howard High School in Macon, Georgia, and I also taught at Central Fine Art, Ivy and Fine Art Magnet High School in Macon. And so predominantly I art teacher.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
so and
Yeah, you've taught
I
at various colleges, university, and high schools, and I was really impressed with that. I mean, you're well known in the art community and the teaching community as far as art is concerned. Tell us a little bit about your art. Your art's a little different. You shared some of that with me. I saw that in your bio as well, and let's talk a little bit about that. How what inspired you to create the art that you create?
well, so the brunt of my earlier works are pretty much pen and ink, black ink on coffee stained paper, and they began as exploration in ideas of geometry, sacred geometry, but
Mhm.
also notions of language, ancient civilization, lost civilizations. I've always been fascinated by um, illuminated manuscripts, uh, lost texts, Mayan codices, things like that. So that that really drove a lot of my interest early on, and then as my work progressed over time, I began exploring deeper concepts of the universe, ideas of movements both into and out of itself,
Mhm.
and how do you illustrate that in two dimensions? I mean, you're taking a four-dimensional notion. How do you translate something like a Klein bottle into a two-dimensional design? And of course, I'm nutty enough to attempt that. Um, and so Yeah, it's some of the pieces took years to complete.
Wow.
Um, and all. And then as things progressed, particularly when I reached my MFA, actually this piece behind me
I
was
was
one
going
of
to
the
ask you about
first
that. If
years that I.
that's one of your pieces there, so it looked
It's
familiar. It
actually.
looked like your style. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's one of the first ones that I began to just focus more on the idea of shape and symbolism. So it's much more simplified. It's less complex than a lot of the line work pieces. Um, but when you're working on MFA, time is kind of a thing. So you can't spend 4 years working on one
Right.
piece.
Right.
But I also began to explore ideas of. I've always enjoyed um, diagrammatic drawing.
Hmm.
Um, and I've always enjoyed schematics and things like that. So one of the things which you really can't see in the video, but you can kind of see in some of the other pieces, is the inclusion of pencil lines, marking off the kind of the foundational, like the square that the circle resides in. So the crescents reside in a, they're ultimately a circle, but they reside in a square. Oddly enough, a lot of those lines came in after the fact.
Mm.
um they're added in, but also with foldings. I got into folding pieces to and then during the staining process to create a subtle textured line in the ground. um so I'm fascinated with ideas of like ancient documents, you know uh pretty much, you know everywhere from papyrus
Hmm.
to um, 12th century manuscripts.
Right.
So that influence definitely, I think, finds its way into a lot of my work, and and drives it. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of kind of what led me there. I also began exploring my aesthetic in my MFA, photographically, because again, time is of the essence. So, and since a lot of my works, especially at that time, were uh, they're highly radial, and kind of mandalic in appearance, it's how does that translate? So I began um, taking pictures of things with film, with black and white
Hmm.
film, developing the film myself. And now this was in '07, '08.
Okay.
So the photo lab at the school still was operational. So I would go and develop the negatives myself, and then I would take those, and I had an Epson scanner that had the ability to scan negatives. And
Oh
so
wow. Yeah.
because yeah, and what it allowed was, just like I love the quality of staining the paper so it creates these very kind of random shifts in tone, little specks, dots, things like that, to create a kind of ground on which the image sits. The silver grain in film, the it computers to me never truly replicate it properly, because it's you get into genuine randomness and things like that. And so the actual silver grain would translate over really well in the scan, and then I would take that and rework the image digitally. And at the time I was working with, because I was working at scale, so some of these images at their resolution, and were printed at anywhere from 3 feet by 4 feet, on 3 feet by 4 feet sheets.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was working with like 1.5 gig images, which during my MFA, that was time consuming, because you do
Right.
one thing and then you'd have to wait, and then you do another thing, then you have to
Right.
wait.
Right.
But then I'd output those and printed them, mounted them, everything like that. And so I really got to explore my aesthetic there. That is one thing I do enjoy about photography, is that ability to just explore different things
Mm-hmm.
aesthetically.
All right.
I got into macro photography, and with insects and things like that, and kind of trying to tell stories through the titles. Um, so it was that was a lot of fun. Experimenting with just solely using my cell phone, processing everything on the cell phone, but then outputting it and having it printed at much larger, like um, anywhere from 27 to 42 inches uh, across. So
Right. Right. So you've done some large works. That's impressive. I tell you what, that's I try to paint some large paintings, and it's a challenge for me sometimes. Doing a 3 foot by 4 foot. I've got a canvas that's about that size, and it's just white as a snow, and it's just blank right now, and it's like it's begging for me to paint something on it. And I've sometimes I get this. You may have heard this paralysis by analysis. You just
oh
can't.
yeah, I
You
know
know
that
what
one
I'm
very
saying?
well.
Because it's like, okay, we used to talk a lot about that in IT at Geico, because people would spend so much time doing all this analysis. You've got all the facts, you've got all the requirements. What more do you just start working? Just start creating, just start coding, developing. And for me, I'm in different Facebook groups where photographers will allow you to use their photo as a reference for painting. So I've got all kinds of them I've saved, and so I'll go through them. I have thousands. I hate to say it, but it's very time consuming, and I just have to stop and say, I spent 2 hours doing nothing but looking at photos. So it's just I kind of handicap myself, I guess. But anyway, I got to put that aside and say, okay, maybe I just need to take my paints and just start slapping something up there and just see what happens. But yeah, I'm too
Well,
structured for that. I'm not that free expressive guy yet, but maybe I'll get there. But yeah, that's
well,
impressive.
it's one of the things that I used to tell students was, don't overcomplicate it. It's
Yeah,
very, very easy, especially in art. You come up with an idea, and then you that it expands and expands, and you will come up with the greatest idea. That yes, if you did it, that would be wonderful, but it
right.
will take you 85 years to
Yeah,
complete, and
yeah.
that's just not gonna do.
That's
And and I I learned that in my MFA. It's
yeah,
that I had to actually shift mediums in order to explore my aesthetic within that time constraint. And I was a little crazy. I actually completed my MFA in 2 years instead of three.
no, okay,
So I overlooked it.
yeah,
And I don't recommend that.
yeah,
And so it's time was just not my friend in that. So I had to simplify. I had to take things, and maybe that's what that's part of what led me to works like this, but it also
right,
what led me into doing more photography and exploring the aesthetic there, because we get ideas and then we see it and then we're like, wow, I could do this and I could do this, and then there's other things you're like, well, I could do that, but in order to do that, I'd need to learn this, this, and this, and that's going
right,
to take years to learn.
yeah, yeah,
And that's what I tell the students is just don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple.
right,
Uh, at the end of the day, I always go back to the Da Vinci quote of "Art's never finished; it's only abandoned," and that's true. Especially with that overanalysis, we
mm,
tend to, if we wanted to, we could sit and work on one piece for years and years on
right,
end and
right,
never be done. And
yeah,
so you have to just reach a point that say, that's it. That's as far as it goes.
right,
And and all. And so the other thing is allowing the work to be what it wants to. And
mm-hmm,
some of that idea philosophically can be found in kind of comes from Kandinsky and in his writings. That this idea, which really goes back to originally like Plato and Aristotle and Greek notions, that the artist is the medium through which beauty transmits itself from the
mm,
ether. And so and that's one of the reasons why artists' names for a long time were never actually even included in things, simply because they were the tool through which, especially once you hit Christian art and on up to the Gothic, the reasons why the names were not because not included was because you're the artist was the vessel through which God was manifesting
Right.
this beauty into the
Right.
world, and
The
those
art,
kind of
the art
ideas.
piece itself was more important than who created it, per se. You know.
Exactly.
Yeah. They were just an
And
instrument to
so
create this beautiful work of art. Yeah. Yeah.
now when we get to Kandinsky, he brings up the notion that it's while it may come in that way, it is then filtered by our own experiences, thoughts, and things like that. And then it's manifest. One of the things I always enjoy telling students was, you know, when we talk about art and where does it come from, um, the beauty of art is that we get to do something that's honestly is truly magical. We get to
Hmm.
take something that exists as ephemera. It's just a thought, a wisp, a notion, and then we manifest it physically into reality. That's like the
Hmm.
magic. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things I also used to tell them is, never trust an art professor who isn't, slightly crazy, because if you can't see they're crazy, that's concerning. And part of the reason I always say that is because, and why I guess that trope exists, that the artists can be a little out there or off or different.
Hmm.
When you touch the fire of creation, you're burned forever.
Yeah.
It leaves its mark, and so we see the world a little differently.
That's right.
And
That's right.
when you start seeing, when you start opening your eyes and truly seeing things, it can be kind of a shock initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just how much we don't notice on a
Right.
day-to-day basis.
Right.
But
I was thinking when you
that
mentioned
feeds the
that,
work.
yeah, when you mentioned that, I was thinking about Van Gogh. To me, he just saw things different, colors different. It's just, you can see it in his artwork. I mean, you compare that to a Monet or something. I mean, it's just so different. But I just think in his mind, he just saw things in colors and shapes so different from anybody else. Maybe not, but it just
Well,
appears that
he
way.
was a very different individual.
Yeah.
If you've ever read his history, he was uh, he he had a lot of social difficulty,
Right.
which many artists I think can understand. But he and he only really most of his paintings were largely in the last 10 years of his life.
Hmm.
And but and I believe this, when you work on an artwork, there comes a moment where you enter that psychological state of flow where you just kind of detach from the rest of
Yes,
reality and you're just drawn
exactly.
in. It's
Right.
your mind, your thoughts are drifting as you work, and you're lost in that.
Yeah.
And that's I feel bad for people who have never been to that place because
Well,
it's
some people
honestly
call it
so
being in the
wonderful.
zone, that you just
Right.
in the groove, in the zone, or whatever. And you're right. I mean, time just goes by. And the next thing you know, where did the last 2 hours go, or 3 hours? You're so
Hmm.
involved in
It just
creating and painting and working on something, and then somebody's calling you for dinner, and it's 6 o'clock, and it's like, what? I thought it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, So it's like, yeah, you get so involved with that, and it's a unique thing, in my opinion, and it's just, I don't know, you're just channeling so much energy and creativity in that zone, and you're able to just shut things out and just be able to create, and it's really neat if people can experience that, I think. But anyway, sorry I
it's
interrupted
it,
you.
it no that's exactly the point, though. It's what you're describing, though, with your excitement and how you get into it.
Yeah,
That's part of what draws people into making work, is because it's it's kind of like an escape.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
an
yeah,
expression.
yeah.
But also that
The therapy.
detachment
Yeah.
lets us drift in our thoughts, and we get to discover not just ourselves within that. But then as you make the work, at the end, when you step away from it, it begins to inform you about the idea.
Right.
It tells you things you didn't even realize at the time you made it. And that's to me the really fascinating thing. I love the actual act of making.
Hmm.
That's whereas some people they're drawn to, they love to go to galleries and stare at works. And
Right.
my thing is making, of the actual doing of the processes, the mechanics behind it, the theory that exists behind it fascinates me. And maybe that's why I'm always been drawn to teaching.
Yeah. What artists are there? Any artists that inspire you that from years ago, or say when you first started doing some art and teaching art or creating art? Were there any specific artists that you really admired their work, and then and then two, piggyback off of that, of what continues to inspire you today to create your art? So.
Well, I think what initially drove me was my mom. Um, my mom was an artist. She's uh, my entire life. She was published several times in art
And thanks for
magazines.
sharing that, because you had shared that with me about your mom and some of the pieces she created. I was just totally amazed and impressed with. But keep going. Yeah, thanks.
She was in the making sketchbook. She ever since I grew up. I mean, that was just art was just a part of my life.
Hmm.
Um, and being creative and being inventive from both my mom and also my grandfather, her father. Um, I
It's in your DNA,
I
Professor.
enjoy. Yeah, it's just it's just what I enjoy. But so that always was a thing. So that a lot of kids, when they reach a certain age, they kind of tend to break away from just being openly creative, and some of that's a social dynamic and other things. But that never really, and typically with artists that's the way it works, is that doesn't really happen with artists. They just keep going.
Right.
And a lot of that, like I say, I attribute to my mom. And I remember when I was 8 and 9 years old, going to the public library, actually on when it was on Riverside Drive.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was a small public library there, and
Okay.
I would check out the Dungeons and Dragons monster manuals,
Okay.
and I would sit and draw the monsters from those. So the same manuals like you see in shows like Stranger Things,
Uh
because
huh.
that's the same time period.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's I actually still have those,
Oh wow.
and they're but I would draw from those, and that's so I started with drawing monsters and things like that, and a lot of fantasy art, and I really got into fantasy art for a while. There's still some of the fantasy artists from Larry Elmore to Clyde Caldwell to Michael Whelan, people that did book covers and things like that. I always was just enjoyed Boris Vallejo, Keith Parkinson. They really captured a certain aesthetic for me.
Hmm.
And then as I got older, and began to more formally study art and things like that, I found myself very drawn to ancient art, Paleolithic art, the, the illuminated manuscripts, uh, Mayan art is definitely there as well. There's just a lot of ancient old world art is what really has always drawn me. So
Hmm.
naming like a specific influences, it can be a little difficult for me
Okay.
because
Yeah.
it's more driven by historical cultural interests and the works of given time periods and civilizations.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Now, one of the things that you share with me, and I was talking to Beth about it yesterday, that I really enjoyed you doing this, was we I experimented with mixing pigment with a binder, and
Hmm.
you shared that with me about watercolor, and and you brought out your little kit and everything, and had all the different pigments, and I was just really impressed with that. So tell me a little bit about that, and the kind of the history behind that, and I think that's important to you in your art and that kind of thing. But I really enjoyed it. So share with us a little bit about that process.
Well, well, like I was saying, illuminated manuscripts always fascinated me.
Because I
And
mean, there's a history of that, and you were telling me about
oh,
that, and I was just like, oh my gosh, how the people way
well, it's a
back,
whole world.
yeah, and creating paint,
There's so much, and it's absolutely fascinating. Uh, I actually in 2013 I actually filed with the college for a grant to go to Los Angeles to see the St. Albans Psalter, which was on display at the Getty Museum at the time, and attend a demonstration workshop there. And and uh, I received the grant, and it was just absolutely fascinating. I was just drawn into it, and it was there that I learned like where to get a lot of these materials, how they're applied, what the 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 methods by which the paints were made and why they were made. And
right,
I think that's one of the things that really fascinates me personally that a lot of people don't have a tendency to think about because in our right now in our modern times, you run out of paint, you run to the store and buy more paint. Well,
yep,
you have to think even um, Van Gogh couldn't do that.
hmm
And then you go further back and you get like Rembrandt and Vermeer. There was no doing that, and so the point is that palettes become limited in those kind of scenarios. That's one of the reasons why Rembrandt had his palette, Vermeer had his palette, Da Vinci had his palette. Now, granted, his palette was a little bit larger because he also had a workshop. He had people making them.
right,
Um, but uh, but the truth is, when you get back to 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, one of the things that you see a lot is, of course, illuminated manuscripts, typically biblical in nature, uh, breviaries, psalters, moralized Bibles, things like that, that were um, illustrated by monks. And because of the nature of where they lived at the time,
hmm
they had to source many of their pigments locally, and then they had to source their binders locally, which is why watercolor was actually a common binder. Uh, and they didn't use gum arabic, which comes from the acacia tree. They would often use just whatever sap from whatever fruit trees they had on hand,
right,
because the glucose levels in that sap are what actually create the stickiness necessary for it to be a binder. And and then they would mix the pigments with that. Then, of course, during the Crusades, lapis lazuli coming from Persia would find its way back, even as far as England, um, and they would often reserve that because it was so rare, it was worth more than gold in many cases. They would that would often be reserved then for depictions of Christ or Mary,
right,
depending on the what they were illustrating. And so there's a whole rich history and methodology that was used in how they illustrated things because they would not mix anything except for any of the paints that they made, with the exception of they would mix with white. But other than that, to tint it. But other than that, they didn't mix because it had to be the color as God intended, the way it came to them. So there were specific rules, and but by functioning within those kind of constraints, they learned to do so much that we even still use and see these techniques today, in even in digital art and vector art and things like that,
That is
where
so
that what you can do becomes limited.
right, right. Yeah, that was so interesting when you shared that with me about their limited palette, and they didn't mix colors together, but they would put colors side by side and everything. And but yeah, that was just so neat. I appreciate you sharing that with me and taking the time and bringing everything down to the studio. And
Oh,
yeah, it was
absolutely.
just really educational for me. I gain appreciation for what the early artists had to go through. You know, we and you're right. We take so much for granted. Well, I'm out of whatever color. Let me run to the craft store. I can order it online through no endorsement here, Dick Blix or Jerry's Autorama, or whoever you get your supplies from, and have it shipped to you. And sometimes Amazon overnight it to you. But yeah, I mean, just the process of going through and creating the paint, and yeah, it's just very impressive. I really enjoyed that. Yeah. So, um, what um, what what do you find most challenging about the art that you've created? And then two, what do you find? I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about your teaching and your experiences of teaching students, and what you find challenging in teaching students as well. So tell us a little bit about what you find challenging in creating your work sometimes, and or being an artist. Maybe that's it. Maybe what's challenging is being an artist, and then also what has been challenging in teaching in the students.
Okay, well, as far as my work goes, there's we never anytime you work on anything that has a lot of repetition in it, that can become a little exhausting mentally.
Yeah.
So there, your hand cramps up, your neck starts hurting, things like that,
Right.
and there's just there's a kind of endlessness that can create a little bit of anxiety. So overcoming those kind of visual challenges and challenges and making of the work can sometimes be a little difficult. Additionally, if and there have been pieces that I reached pretty far into the work, and then I suddenly made a mistake, and then
Mm.
trying to figure out how can I take this, because I'm working in pen and ink, and I've gotten so many hours
Ooh,
into the piece.
wow.
How
Yeah.
can I take this and then use it, either try to use it to my advantage
Right.
or work in the mistake, so that it
Not
then actually
noticeable.
is no
Yeah.
longer a mistake. It's
Right.
just a part of the piece,
Right.
and trying to overcome things like that. That can be difficult, and it can also be very frustrating.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What I love about pen and ink is its permanence, seeing the ink itself draw into the fibers of the paper as the pen moves across, is just it's just that whole thing is very fascinating to me. At
Right.
the same time, that permanence means you have to be careful. It's very easy, just one little jump or scare or movement, and all of a sudden you've got a line where you didn't
Right.
intend one.
Right. It's not like
If
oil
you can
paint. You can just
overcome,
wipe it off and then
but
start over, right? I mean,
no,
it's
no,
one and done, and it's like, oh crap,
and
now what do I
that's
do? Yeah.
so you have to respect the medium, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
you in while I love that fact about it, that it is kind of unforgiving. It's it can be challenging. It can be frustrating because, like I say, you get get 50 hours into a pen and ink work, and then accidentally have a line go somewhere it shouldn't,
Yeah.
or fill in something that you shouldn't have. And at that point, you have to make the decision. Can I, am I going to try to work through this,
Save it or
or is
trash it.
this done and I got to start over? Right.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I always find it's best to work through. And I think that's one of my approaches in teaching that differs from a lot of people. Uh, I remember in my MFA, I had a professor that was a strong believer in, have you done, 100 works this week? No, I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't. And well, why not? And so, and that's actually an art teaching approach, wherein it's it's about volume. It's about using volume to learn. So,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that that's not a legitimate approach. Um, it's just not my approach. Where
Right.
you use volume to learn. You make a mistake, you do another piece. You make a mistake, you do another piece. And things like that. And that's great, especially if you've got the money for the art supplies. But if you're a student, you
Exactly.
probably don't
Exactly.
have the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because art
so,
materials and supplies are not cheap, as you know. Yeah.
oh no, they are not. And so my approach has been what I like to call overcoming the visual challenge. Instead of doing 100 pieces,
Hmm.
you you commit to engage yourself with with your piece. And initially, you might mess up a few times. Okay. But
Right.
the idea is solving the problem. It's about finding ways to make things work. And so it takes up a lot less than supplies, but also it forces you to really think visually.
Hmm.
And and it also makes you step away from that idea of forcing it to be what you see in your head. When you have to overcome issues and mistakes or work through problems visually, particularly before you commit more permanent, like inks and things like that,
Right.
you have to work through your issues. You work them through in your sketchbook, you work them through in your
Hmm.
head,
Hmm.
and you work them through on the piece itself, and allow it to evolve as you work with it. And this approach I like because it requires a lot of critical thinking,
Hmm.
and particularly when dealing with art students in their early 20s, where critical thinking is really developing as that frontal lobe
Yeah.
finishes out its development. It forces not just to consider this, but it also helps with building insight into build, what your medium is, what you attach to, what you connect with. And and I've dealt with many a frustrated student.
I bet
They,
you have.
that's for sure. I've had students just get mad at their work, and all. But what I find when I work with students is, in order, I think one of the biggest difficulties, which I think many art teachers have, is you get students come into your class and they already have this kind of preconceived notion of things, and especially at the college freshman level,
Hmm.
this the notions are often very similar, and they they've yet to really break free of certain things. So they come in and they think, well, this is how that should be drawn, or this is how something should look,
Right.
and and they've become kind of fixed in their view. And that's, to me, one of the big challenges is because I get people, and I've had many students say, well, I can't draw. You say that,
Right.
but the truth is that's a preconceived notion you're walking in with. You're walking in
That's a
saying you
good
can't
point.
draw.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
you're limiting yourself. The
That's
truth
right.
is anyone can learn to draw. Now,
Right.
are there people who have a kind of natural talent and ability to draw? Yes. Now, if those people don't really do anything with that skill, then they stay kind of at a certain level.
Hmm.
But if you get someone who, say, initially their drawing skill is lower, and then somebody else who's much higher, but this person who's lower works at it. They work on the techniques, they develop, they keep working at it, they try it, they solve the visual problems, they move through, they learn the techniques. Well, if the person with the higher skill level doesn't do those same things, then that person will surpass them.
Right.
That's just that's a reality. Now,
Right.
of course, if that person with the natural skill level does those things, then yes, they will progress.
Yeah.
And it is much harder for someone who doesn't have that innate level to reach. But one of the problems with people who come in, students who come in with a really high skill level, I mean, I've had students come in and I'm just like, you make me embarrassed to even pick up a pencil. I mean, it's like they're good. They were so good. But one of the difficulties and challenges with dealing with those students is they have a tendency to stagnate. And part of that comes from everybody telling them, "Oh, you're so good, you're so good," and then they kind of they stagnate in place, and so their work never progresses.
Right.
And one of my former students actually reached out to me not terribly long ago, asking if how do you teach someone whose skill level is higher than yours, and that's a challenge. And what I always found the best way to think about it is like this: uh, you're guiding, you're steering them,
Mm-hmm.
because think about it like this. Plenty of coaches in professional sports, oh, they don't have the skill of the
Oh no.
athletes,
Yeah. No.
but they're the coach.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they have experience, they have insight, they understand certain things that the players just don't.
Right.
And so when you're working with someone who has a higher natural level than you, would and is more progressive than you, how do you teach them? Well, you have to bear in mind you've got experience, you've got insight. Plus, you aren't them. You see the world differently, which
That's
means
true. Yeah. So
you
true.
can you open their eyes to other things. You have to remind people that what's obvious to them isn't obvious to other people.
That's true.
And so it's more like a guide. It's more a little more like mentoring in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And
That's a good point. Yeah, I can see that. Mm-hmm. And coaches are like
I
that
think
too.
the other
Sports. Yeah. Yeah.
that's what you're because you also have to cheer them on.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, artists are a finicky bunch. I
Oh yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah.
they,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
depression, anxiety are
Discouraged,
very common with art
frustrated.
students. And so,
Yeah.
yes, getting discouraged easily, wanting to give up, getting
Worst critic.
frustrated.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Artists will tell you, oh, I need the critique. No, but we hate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's,
It sucks. I mean, it's terrible. Don't look at it.
yeah.
Yeah. Kind of thing.
And all, we're our own worst critics.
We
And
are.
so,
We are. Yeah.
you have to kind of you have to cheerlead them,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that I find has always worked well for me, as an art professor, was always number one, treating my students like people,
Right.
and number two is not only treating them like people but encouraging them
Mm-hmm.
and supporting them, and maybe that's why, I mean, even a decade later, I hear from former students regularly. It's very that's very common for me. I actually the old Mogi Artist Guild in Macon began as when we realized at Middle Georgia that there were so many limitations to trying to start uh, the art club on the that campus,
Right.
um, that they started getting frustrated. I started getting frustrated, and I suggested take it off campus. And I remember when they met originally, the original founding members, they were like a bunch of they were my former students, and they I remember that meeting and them deciding to do that, and here they are uh, over a decade later, and that group is still going,
Oh wow.
and
Yeah.
I'm
It's
just
great.
yeah, I'm very amazed by them. I'm very happy. Most of my students either work in the field or they are still active
Hmm.
in art, and that's that makes me feel good.
That's
It
great.
really does.
Yeah, that's great.
And they know, and they still can reach out to me. And I've even had some because I keep I'm a bit of a data hoarder, so I actually still have everyone's portfolio for the last 15 years,
Oh
and
wow.
I've had students reach out and say, "Hey, I lost some work. Do you still have it?" And I find it and I post it and send them the link,
That's
and
great.
there you
That's
go.
great. Yeah. Yeah. I know they appreciate that, being able to do that and contact you and reach back out to you and that kind of thing. And yeah, I appreciate those comments that, as far as, you encouraging the students, because some of the students, they feel so inadequate. It's like, I want to learn. I'm hoping I'm getting better. And what sometimes we forget is, look how far you've come from the day you started.
Hmm.
Some art lessons to 6 months later. You couldn't even do a stick figure. Now look at what you're doing. You've gone so far beyond that, and 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 hopefully all artists, and probably a lot of them do this anyway. We save our work. Um, I'll paint. I'll do paintings, and it may not be something I either want to try to sell or give away or whatever, but I don't want to throw it away, right? And
Right.
I'll just take it off the stretcher bars because I do oil paintings, and I'll just take the canvas off the
Hmm.
stretcher bars, and it's dry, and I'll get three or four of them. I'll just roll them up together, and put rubber bands around them, and I've got them. And so if I want to pull them out and look at them, 2 or 3 years later, I've got it. That way, I don't have to worry about storing all these canvases all over my house. I've got them in like a little scroll almost. But then
Hmm.
what I'll do too is I'll restretch canvas on those stretcher bars and reuse them. So, which is kind of cool. But you look back 5 years and you say, "Oh my gosh, look how far you've come." Now, are you perfect at it? Are you an expert at it? No, but the more you do it, I think it's going through that process. You're learning as you go through it. And it's like with me, and we talked about, it's very critical for you because you mentioned, if you make a mistake, how do I, either I trash it or I got to save this and somehow incorporate this in and change things a little bit. But with oil painting, it's like, I'll just wipe that off and I'll paint over it or whatever. Um, and I like that about oils, because you can fix those mistakes. But after I've painted something, I can look at it and say, yeah, that turned out pretty good, or no, that didn't turn out good. But what could I have done better? You know what I'm saying? What could I have done different
Hmm.
to make it better? What is it I need to do? Is it part of my process that I go through, or is it a technique that I'm not, using? And, evaluating, and maybe being constructive feedback to ourselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, self-evaluation is
yeah,
critical,
yeah.
and one of the things I found is oftentimes if you ask someone, okay, where did you mess up? What is wrong?
Hmm.
I don't even have to know. They know,
Right.
and they'll say
Yep.
it's the in a way prompting someone to open up to self-evaluate then allows them to go, oh, okay, I see here what I did, I see what I did here, and I see what I did here. And fostering that skill is really important because that's what gets you through when you're not in school. You don't have critique, you don't have professors, you don't have teachers hovering over you, telling you certain things. When it's just you and that's it, and you're doing this for you, or you're doing this because you just want to, or you have a drive to. How do you progress and improve? And it's you have to foster that self that 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 self evaluation, and you have to be honest with yourself about it.
Right, right. You do. Because you don't, and I like that because it can be difficult for some people to do that, but it's all part of. It's difficult to really when you're so close to the canvas and trying to paint like this, you can't see really what you're doing as well. And but then if you're doing that for a couple hours and then step back, you're like, oh my gosh, my proportions are off, whatever.
Hmm.
So, I had an artist friend of mine. He was working on a piece and he posted it on Facebook and he made a comment about it. And he said, "Yeah, I'm applying the 6 foot rule to my painting." And I said, well, 6 foot rule? He said, "Yeah, I step back
Hmm.
6 feet away from it and take a look at it periodically to say, okay, it's going the way I want it to, or no, I've got to change something." But you can't when you're so close up to it.
No, you
Um,
have to step back, almost detach from it a little bit.
exactly. And then sometimes too, I'll just walk away and my little studio's upstairs above the garage, and I'll just go downstairs and maybe get something to drink or eat or whatever, then come back and look at it. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I like the left side, but the right side I need to do some improvements on or whatever. And then I'll look at it from different angles, in the studio and see how it looks and that kind of thing. But yeah, you have to do that. But, we've been
Yeah,
talking.
it's very necessary.
Yeah, we've been talking for over 50 minutes now, and I've
Oh
thoroughly
wow.
enjoyed, getting to know you a little bit better and talking a little bit about who you are. And so, what does the future hold for Professor Charles Ward?
Oh,
What's going?
that's tricky and difficult. Yeah, I'm dealing with a neurologic movement disorder, so that tends to limit me
Kind of
in
limits you a
a
little
lot of
bit, yeah,
things.
physically. Yeah,
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 it makes it difficult and gets very frustrating. So
yeah.
really, in a way, it takes me a little bit back to being an undergrad and getting
Uh huh.
frustrated and
Uh
getting
huh. Yeah.
irritated because I've got lines going places I didn't want them to,
Right.
um, and just learning to deal with those kind of things.
Yeah.
I Teaching is a lot harder with this
Right.
condition. It does affect the cognitive as well. So it's I can't do like I used to and multitask and juggle what I was thinking about, what I'm doing, what I will be doing, and
Right.
managing multiple students at one time and keeping up with where they're at is
Yeah.
extremely difficult now.
Yeah.
And so where am I going? Ideally, there are some projects that I've been sketching on and doodling on for years that I want to do. Um, and I think once I can get to the point where I kind of get my condition managed
Mm-hmm.
correctly, then I can get into a position where I can relax into really being able to work on those
Okay.
things.
Good.
And
Good.
that's my goal. That's
Yeah.
what I want to do is
Best of luck with that and continued success with that. Um, do you have any works for sale, or do you have a website where people can find more of your works and just see some of them? Now,
I
I'd like to get a couple of pictures, if I could, of your artwork and try to put it in the podcast,
oh yeah,
either at the beginning or
absolutely.
the end, and
That's
use them as thumbnails and things
Yeah,
like that, so people could see your
absolutely.
work. Yeah, yeah.
I did, but maintaining a domain costs money,
I
and
know. I know. I just renewed
so
my
I
website. It's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it.
and so I actually just went ahead and allowed my domain to expire. Um, so currently, and many of my works are sold. They're so the originals are sold, and so I sometimes on occasion, every few years or so, I will try to display some works with the Multi Artist Guild when they have a show. And I usually will try to run some prints or something like that. But uh, at the moment, I don't really have anything new for sale or anything like
Okay.
that.
Okay. All right. Great. No problem. Is there anything else you'd like to share with folks about who you are, your art, that kind of thing, if that we may not have covered already?
I think the one other thing that I really came to realize as an art teacher or professor, and I think that a lot of people have a tendency to sometimes forget, is you actually have to genuinely care.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why I still talk to my former students, is
Yeah.
because I honestly do care.
Yeah.
And when you care about your students and you care about the people that you work with, it makes a difference both for you and for them.
Right. Yeah. It does.
And so if you put the same care into the people as you do your own artwork, and you want to see them uh, grow into their potential, uh, if you put that care and that time into it, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you
Mhm.
for being on the podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And, I'm sure in the future, our paths probably cross in some way, shape, or
Oh, yeah.
form. I got your contact information and continue to reach out to you and check in and see what's going on. And who knows, I
Oh, yeah.
may see you back down in Beth's Smith studio in teaching and that kind of thing. But thank you so much, Professor Charles Ward, for being
No
on the
problem.
podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for tuning in and catching another episode today. Please give us a thumbs up to the podcast, like us, and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to help it to grow and that kind of thing. We really appreciate you tuning in, and also give us some feedback if you know of an artist that you think would be interesting for me to interview. Please leave me a comment, and I'll be glad to reach out to them and get to know them a little bit better. And share this with your friends and family and fellow artists. And but anyway, thanks guys, and we'll catch you guys later in the next episode. Take care, everybody. Take care, Professor.
You too. Thank you.